Hello once again. It's Boxing Chat Show number 5 here in London, and Dan Rafael, of course, in the United States. I want to see what hat he's got on today, let alone what he's having for dinner. Oh, it's the same hat as last time.
Yeah. You know what? Because when I was done wearing it, I just put it back up on the hat rack, and here it is. Lewis Tyson is on. That was a big fight.
So I've got to start by asking you what's for dinner tonight.
Not a clue. Same as always.
Plus ça change with you. Plus ça change. Nothing ever changes.
Hey, you know me well.
Let me put it this way. What do you fancy for dinner tonight?
Well, what I fancy for dinner is what I fancy for about the last 60 days is to go out to our favorite restaurant near the house and relax and have some nice food and a nice drink and some sports on television and enjoy myself. But that's not happening.
No, that's probably another 60 days away in reality.
It may be longer than that. Yeah. So I don't know.
Cool. It's lovely to see you as always. Show number 5. Thank you to everyone. And I know you're the same, Dan. But thank you to everyone for enjoying these. And we have lovely comments from everyone. It's just a chat, you and I, as we normally do when we're on a fight week, you know? I
said to somebody that what you see on the video of Gareth and I is the same stuff that we would be discussing if we were sitting, at a restaurant at the MGM or, walking out of the arena in New York City back to a hotel. It's the same sort of stuff that we always back and forth about.
Yeah, we've got our favourite restaurants that we nip to afterwards, haven't we?
Most definitely.
And I am missing them at the moment. Let's just clear up a few things. We've discussed these little things before. Mike Tyson, since we spoke last, it still rolls on. People really do think that if Holyfield and Mike Tyson are going to have a third fight, I'll give my take on it.
What planet are we in, dude? What planet are we on?
Exactly. It's not reality, is it?
Listen, I get it. People are bored. There's nothing else going on in a meaningful manner in not just boxing, but in sports in general. And whatever is going on, there's nothing certain about it. There were some UFC events, so that's certainty. So that's a good thing. There's a lot of discussions about how they're bringing back the NBA, about how they're bringing back Major League Baseball, how they're bringing back boxing to whatever degree they do. But again, it's a lot of it's just it's in the ether right now. There's no hard and fast guidelines. There's nothing that's done for any of the big leagues or for boxing. So what else do people want to talk about? A 10-second video that Iron Mike put on social media where he is strong and explosive, hitting the mitts, and then his great rival Evander Holyfield, retorting and basically putting up his own video and saying
on the road.
I mean, it's fun and kind of amusing to discuss, but I mean, seriously, and I'm not saying anything bad about Evander Holyfield, who I've known for a long time and have a personal affection for, was with him not that long ago, back in February for a while when we were in Vegas at the Fury and Wilder rematch. Same thing with Iron Mike. Here's the point, though. They were shot fighters 15 years ago when their careers were on, at the end. Tyson at that point, Evander boxed on for several more years after that. And they're the ones that would admit at the end they couldn't compete at that point with the top guys. Certainly not Tyson. I can still remember sitting there in the arena at the MCI Center, now the Capital One Center in Washington, D.C., a half an hour from my house when he had his last fight against Kevin McBride. And I had an interview with him one-on-one after that fight. And his head was down. He's like, man, I just don't have it anymore. And he doesn't. I mean, so, if he wants to get in shape, if he wants to continue to work out, good for him and be healthy and maybe excite some people because he's looking explosive for a few seconds. That's cool. Maybe even if he wants to have an exhibition and raise some money for a good cause, also cool. But the notion of an actual fight, even an exhibition where you're going all out against Holyfield or whoever else, to me is just sort of like, I mean, is that the depth that we've come in the sport at this point? I mean,
Dan, I think an exhibition bout where they do have an audience and they do a Q&A afterwards is fine with me, and they show shapes and maybe Evander drops a bit of an ear and they have a bit of fun with it. That kind of thing would be amazing, and it would create. You could get an audience of thousands that could go on tour for that, and they could have questions in the ring, and they can reenact their fight and do shapes. Have a referee or a third person in there comparing it. I think it would be amazing, and I'm just throwing that out there as an idea. And I think people would go to see that, and they'd pay to watch it. I mean, I remember you talk about being with Mike at the end when he quit on his stool against Kevin McBride 15 years ago as it is. I remember it's probably 9 years ago. It might even be less time than that. I cannot remember the date. I was with Evander in Germany when he fought Nikolai Valuyev and won that night.
In Russia.
It was in Russia, was it? Yeah. No, I think it was Germany. Anyway, I was definitely at the fight because I remember talking to Evander about his 11 kids and his last kid was in college. And he said, listen, I'm still fighting to get the last one through college and then I'm done.
Right.
No, he did, because, he's a stud. And that's what he was, as well as one of the greatest physiques we'll ever see in boxing. I thought he beat Valuyev that night, by the way.
I did too.
Yeah, and he got a raw decision. But even then he said, I've had enough. I'm only doing it to put my last boy, who was like 19 at the time, through college. And he'll be 26 now. But
the fact that we would have an actual discussion about the possibility of two guys in their 50s coming back into a young man's game is crazy. I mean, look, I'll give you a couple examples of 50-year-olds off the top of my head that I can think that boxed. We saw what happened to Bernard Hopkins at the end of his career. He did have some wins as a 50-year-old, but we saw him get at 53, I believe, or 52, literally get knocked out of the ring by Joe Smith. Joe Smith Jr. Exactly.
Yeah. That was horrible. Horrible to watch. Yeah. Horrible. You and I covered almost his entire career, and it was horrible to watch.
Now, and here's another one, and I was thinking about this because I knew we were going to talk about this. And this is somebody that's more on the same level because he fought Mike Tyson 2 times. Razor Ruddock came back at the age of 50 plus. He got like a win against like a very, very low level opponent, and it was not something that anybody in boxing should be proud of because he didn't look that good. It was kind of a farce, frankly. But then when he had another fight, which I actually saw the video of, they actually showed it on TV, like on tape delay. He got knocked out real bad by just a regular type opponent. In his peak, when he fought Iron Mike, Razor Ruddock was a very formidable heavyweight contender, a big puncher with a good chin. Only got stopped. Had been stopped by Lennox, and then Tyson, the stoppage was somewhat controversial. But the point is, he was like 52, 53, same basic age as Holyfield and Tyson, and he was in that same heavyweight group of their time, and we saw what happened. So it's just not a good idea in my opinion.
Ditto, another guy we both love, Roy Jones Jr. Ditto. Went on too long. Knocked out in Russia by Enzo Maccarinelli in the end.
Hey, at least Roy, to my knowledge, is not sitting there talking about getting back in the ring to fight. I mean, Roy is now, his thing in boxing is he's training some fighters. Obviously, he's not doing commentary because HBO's not involved in the game anymore. But as a broadcaster, Roy was very good at explaining the fights, and I think that any broadcaster that was looking for a former fighter / trainer for that broadcast role, Roy Jones would still be somebody that would do for any network that was out there looking for somebody for that particular spot. But thankfully, he's not talking about getting back in the ring to fight.
But his promotional group is involved with that Mexican group that should be back in a couple of weeks' time, May 23, which will be interesting to see. On another clear-up note, and this is something that goes round and round and round in circles, and I don't want to say it's irritating because it's always good when they're in the news. Can you believe it? We just spent 10 minutes talking about Holyfield and Tyson, even though I know, and we probably will end up speaking about it the next 2 months till lockdown ends. Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder axis. My take is, yes, there probably are talks, and Bob Arum squeezed out a bit of news about this. We know that MTK Global in the background worked with both the Eddie Hearn side and the Frank Warren, Bob Arum side. So there probably is a bit of talk there from NTK. They're based out in Dubai, aren't they? So there's talk with the Middle East, but they are only talking, I think, about setting up a pair of fights after Wilder and Fury have fought. Wilder's come out this week from somewhere apparently and said, I'd take $10 million, but I don't see any quotes. And then Tyson Fury has said today, no, I want to beat him in the ring. I'm not giving him $2 million to step aside. I'm completely on board with all of that. I think Fury and Wilder will fight next, and that's one of them has a catastrophic injury in the shower, which does happen sometimes in boxing.
Right. I mean, the fact that it just shows you how little is going on right now, that this just never stops. I mean, from my indications are that Deontay Wilder is not interested in step aside at this point. Now, maybe he threw a number out. I don't know if he did. Like you said, I didn't see the story that you mentioned. There was apparently no quotes, as you said. You're going to need somebody to actually have a direct quote from either Deontay Wilder himself or from somebody in his management or somebody that's with him, a Shelley Finkel, somebody like that, a representative from the PBC or whoever. And until that happens, I don't believe it. And as we've discussed, even if one of the two boxers who's in that position of having contracted fights with either Anthony Joshua, which is Kubrat Pulev, his mandatory challenger, or Deontay Wilder, who has exercised his rematch right with Tyson Fury, it's not good enough to have one of them take a step aside. You have to have both take a step aside. I saw some quotes from Bob Arum, and he's absolutely right. Who's paying that freight? Because it's not like, $100,000, which would be certainly something that would be happening, or even $1 million. You're talking about payments for the two guys that would
15 million, probably.
I would think it's more than that, to be honest.
Yeah.
And not only that, but even if they take the money, now you have to come up with the language in the agreement. Who's next? Because both of those guys have rights to fight for that title. If it clears the path for a Fury fight against Anthony Joshua to become the unified champion, when the winner of that fight emerges, does that mean it's going to be Deontay that gets the first crack at the winner, or is it Pulev that gets the first crack at the winner? Or what about Alexander Usyk, who's sitting there as the next mandatory in line?
Yeah.
And what about Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua? If they make a match with each other, that they're going to want to do a rematch clause, so the loser of that can regain. So it's a bunch of nonsense. So don't tell
Dillian White that, for God's sake.
And Dillian White's going to be sitting there as mandatory down the road also at the early part of next year. So here's the way I look at it. And I mean, I'm just using what I hope is reason and ration, is that, like you said, Wilder and Fury 3 happens whenever they can work it out. And who knows, because when you can have crowds or gates or how pay-per-view would perform, whatever. Okay, they'll do their third fight at some point. The Pulev-Joshua fight will take place. And you and I both know from our own conversations with people involved in that they're looking at alternative sites potentially if they can't do it in front of a big crowd in the UK, about going maybe to the Middle East or something along those lines. That fight would take place. And after that, then maybe there's the conversation that's more serious about putting them together, knowing also, by the way, they're still going to have to address Usyk, and they're still going to have to address Dillian White, who also each have theoretically interim bouts also that have been postponed and that have been rescheduled. Who knows if they'll happen? And that's Dillian White against Povetkin and Alexander Usyk against Chisora, which are also interesting fights in their own right. So, it's good that there's excitement and interest in the heavyweights, but, people need to just calm down, let the things that are already scheduled take place, and then we'll hopefully have the undisputed fight.
Correct. Well, I couldn't have
use reason and common sense, but someone's got to do it.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself, Den. And I completely agree with you on all of it. I mean, we know how this works. There are extraordinary circumstances sometimes, and things can go, like, let's say Deontay Wilder smashed his leg up in a car accident and all that kind of thing, then, there are extreme circumstances in extremis where it could change. But let's just, like you say, let's just sit back and stop fantasizing so much. But I think it generates from people that aren't around the industry generally, and or even there's so many podcasts at the moment. Someone just posits something as a theory,
and it becomes a thing.
And I think that's what's happening.
But here's the thing, though, Gareth, and this is important for people to realize. At least you and I, on a regular basis, speak to the actual people involved. And I'm not knocking anybody that wants to get on a podcast and have a back and forth and give their opinions. And that's what makes the world go around. I've actually spent some time during my time at home watching different, because I never used to do that. I never really watched a lot of the podcasts.
No time. We
I'm so busy doing other stuff, but
Yeah.
I'm as busy right now. I am busy with other stuff, my own show and writing for Boxing Scene, doing these things with you and et cetera. But I have taken time to watch some of the other podcasts. Some of those folks that do them, they do a good job and they're entertaining and that sort of thing. And some of them are people that are also in the business and who talk to people, but a lot of them are not in the business, or they're on the fringes of the business. And so, it's cool that they have their opinions, but I feel good about the fact that when you and I get on here and we discuss a particular topic, most of the time that topic is something that we have some more than just an opinion about, because we have spoken to a person that's directly involved in whatever situation we're talking about. So,
well, on
whatever
that,
that's.
yeah, well, on that very note, last night, about midnight UK time, I gave Bob Arum a ring and asked him about this June the 9th card involving Shakur Stevenson and the opponent being, gosh, it's escaped my mind now.
Was it Rafael Rivera?
Rafael Rivera. Bob's answer to me, because people are almost writing it like it's done. Yeah,
it's not done.
Well, exactly.
No matter what anybody says,
again, I'll quote him. Hey, Gareth, apart from the fact he said, hey, my friend, I do like you, but you don't know shit about boxing. No, I always get Bob to say that, as you know. But he said, hey, Gareth. I said, look, June the 9th, it's being sold as done. He said, no. It needs to be cleared with ESPN. We need to clear it with the commission. We need to put all the things in place. It is potentially going to happen on June.
It's in pencil on their board.
Exactly.
People
need to know that.
There's I mean, the way it goes, and maybe now they're not doing it, but they'll get on the phone, 3 or 4 different people from the company, maybe all together, maybe at one at a time. But Bob will talk to people like, Todd DeBuff,
Todd Moretti. What was Moretti?
They'll talk to the matchmakers, Brad Goodman and Bruce Trampler,
yeah.
and they'll sort of come up with like, okay, what do we want to do? What's realistic in terms of an opponent? Because remember, they can't bring opponents in from other countries right now, so that makes it even a little more complicated. How much money do we have available? What does the network say? What's the status of the rules and the guidelines for Nevada or elsewhere we've talked about, whether it's California, Texas? Those are the states that Bob has mentioned and the Top Rank has mentioned. So all that has to get worked out. I mean, and it makes sense, by the way, that a Shakur Stevenson would be high on their sort of pencil list of who's back first, because it only makes sense that the first guys canceled are the first guys back. So take, for example, 2 fighters that come to mind in the Top Rank stable. Shakur Stevenson was supposed to go in mid-March. His bout was the first one in all of boxing that was canceled because of this situation.
And then there's Conlon.
Literally, it was canceled on Thursday, and the fight was supposed to be Saturday. Michael Conlon, who was a couple of days later, and also Jose Ramirez, who fight against Victor Postol was canceled in February when it was in China, when this was all just starting, and then postponed till May, and then canceled again because of the situation. And even that fight is going to be hard for them to put back together right away, unless Ramirez gets the option to do an interim fight, because Victor Postol, again, not an American, not in, from what I was told yesterday, not in this country, even though he spends a lot of time in Los Angeles. He's in Russia, where he's from. So to travel from Russia to America right now in the midst of this is not feasible. So that fight's probably going to be put off a little longer anyway. So Shakur coming back in one of the first fights, or maybe the very first fight, makes sense because he was first canceled, but we'll see. But again, nothing is done because Nevada hasn't even come up with guidelines or approved anything. They still have to get things done with the MGM. If it all does get done, there's a good chance they'll just basically stake out a big ballroom in the MGM Grand. They'll have their stuff set up and they'll just keep it there, like they were going to do with Shakur and Conlon a couple of days apart in the same venue in New York City, and just run shows there regular. So they don't have to keep breaking down the ring, breaking down the lights. And they just have that as their base for, a month or two and run through the shows. But again, until it's done, it ain't done.
Well, it brings us very nicely to the fact that, yeah, exactly. My feeling is it's a little bit soon even, but I think they've been prompted by the fact that ESPN had their UFC events last night. And also on Saturday that was fairly successful. But there was a fighter from Brazil that tested positive and 2 of his cornermen. So that's going to be looked through. The things that have come out of it are perhaps people involved, or at least the fighters involved in the event, need to test 2 weeks before and then stay in quarantine, which they didn't do in the UFC. They just did pre-tests, nasal swab tests, antibody tests, and temperature tests every day. Maybe there needs to be a longer lead time so that you can set up the process of all these fights. And then maybe you go for one every fortnight, or one every week, like you say, in the same venue, with the same crews, people being tested the whole time. That's the kind of rigmarole that is, if we're talking about health and safety at the moment,
right. I think that's
rigmarole that they've got to go through, Dan, every single time.
Here's the thing. I think all of those things are likely to happen, the scenario that we just talked about. Whether it's that early in June, I'm not quite sure about. It seems, like you said, it seems maybe a little bit soon because Nevada hasn't even given the blessing yet. But okay, let's say that they get that done. Here's my beef is that for people to write and say it as though it's a done deal, stop.
Yeah.
I deal in facts, not nonsense. So yeah, it's a possibility, but it's not done. And it's a lot of hill to climb before they get to the top of that mountain.
To back you up on that, as I was talking to Bob, and I just wanted a call, like we put in, to check whether it's an email, a call, whatever, Bob said, gotta go. The commission's on the phone. In other words, he ran off because he's discussing it with the commission at the moment. You know,
which means
it's not done yet. Discussing, and it was, right. You know, it was live and happening in front of me, and you know, we're not boasting.
I would say
it's like people say, it's that funny thing when people say, "Why do you always tell stories about being with so and so?" Because it's my job.
Exactly. Listen, it's okay for people to talk and write that stuff. That's fine, but you just put it in the proper context. That this is something that's being discussed. This is something that's possible. This is something that they would like to do. But then you have to also explain that this step has to happen, and that step has to happen, and that step has to happen before it's a reality, and that it's not done yet.
Who's the hardest person to get hold of sometimes?
The hardest person, like in terms of a boxer?
In the boxing industry, yeah.
In the business?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I mean, Al Heyman doesn't talk to the press. Does that count?
No, he's hard to get hold of. But there's loads of his lieges and people that work for him are very easy to get hold of.
Most of the people that are in the business are not, you know, promoters and managers, and even a lot of the fighters, trainers, that sort of thing. Not that hard to get a hold of for the most part. I mean, if you have their contact information, you know, I find, you know, getting in touch with promotional people and network people and fighters is, you know, is really not that hard, frankly.
Right.
I mean, I've been for many years, so you have you know, you can direct message them or send them a text or just call them direct. I mean, so it's, you know, the communication.
But sometimes I've learned this over the years, and finally on this point, that sorry for interrupting you, that sometimes when you don't hear from someone, you get as much noise back with the question you're asking because you know it's close to happening, or do you know what I mean? Or it's it's almost a reveal when that regular guy doesn't get back to you sometimes.
What I've said to certain people in the business that I've dealt with over the years is, you know, when you're calling and you're trying to contact them about a story you're working on, or you hear a rumor or you hear something that you think might be happening and you want to do a little bit of reporting on it, dig a little deeper or whatever, you know, whether they'll talk to you on the record or off the record or however it may be. There are certain people you kind of know what's up because you call them and they're the people that you talk to on a regular basis, and then suddenly they're not responding, they don't text you back, they don't answer the call. I tell those people, like, listen, I said, we've known each other for like however many years, you know, we have a good relationship. Don't duck me. If you don't want to make a comment, just say, listen, I can't talk about it. Yeah. No problem. I'm not badger you to death. I might ask you 2 or 3 times and then I'll leave you alone for a little bit and then, you know, I'll come back. But just don't, that annoys me when you just do the duck, you know what I mean? You can just say politely, listen, I don't want to talk about it, and I'll leave you alone for the most part. No problem.
Some questions have dropped in. Paul,
okay, good. I like
asking, are these chats available as a podcast? No, you don't need them as a podcast. They're videos. You just go on YouTube and watch them for free, can't they?
You don't even have to listen and look at our pretty face. You can just listen to it in the background while you're doing something else.
Exactly. Thanks, Paul, anyway.
Hi, Paul.
Adriano Reyes says, Dan, what's your personal opinion about GGG versus Canelo Alvarez 2 fights? Who did you see winning the fights?
All right. In the first fight, I thought that Triple G clearly won a close fight. And I didn't like the draw. And of course, like everybody, what made it worse was the horrendous scorecard that was so lopsided in favor of Canelo. So, but I thought that Golovkin clearly won the first fight. In the second fight, I, and many of us who were there ringside, I had the second fight a draw. So to me, Triple G should be 1 win, no losses, and 1 draw against Canelo. And as it turns out, Canelo was 1-0-1. Golovkin believes he's 2-0, and that's how it goes. So a lot of people had that second fight, the legit draw. The first fight was a BS draw.
I had Canelo winning a very tight 1-round decision, a 1-point decision victory in the second fight. But I had Golovkin as wide as 8-4 or 7-5 definitely, but as wide as 8-4 in the first fight. I know we're both at those fights, so we saw it with our own eyes. I mean, but it was, but like you say, the judging in the first fight was just, it exposed the poverty of knowledge of some of the judges in the very biggest fights. There was nothing for me. I don't think it was bribed or anything like that. It's just
No, I don't either.
poverty of ability in many ways.
I'll say this: those fights are destined to be debated and discussed and argued about in terms of who won as many years down the line as people still to this day, if you bring up, should they have stopped Meldrick Taylor and Chavez won? Who was the rightful winner of Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard? Fights like that were very popular, very significant fights that people still will argue about 25, 30 years later. They're going to do the same thing, boxing, when it comes to the results of Golovkin and Canelo.
What's for dinner, Dan? They're all asking.
I told you. I don't know.
Well, I haven't had my dinner because we're a little bit earlier tonight, but I'm having braised steak
Nice.
in a red wine sauce and broccoli and some potatoes sautéed as well. Just saying, and some petit pois.
My great hope is that in the future, someday I'll be back in the UK covering a fight,
and I'll cook for you.
And I'm coming to your house and you're cooking dinner because that
you
sounds
can bring
great.
the whole family with you and they can stay here and we'll go off and work every day. Your son and your wife have become a staple of my life while lockdown's been here. You're always welcome to bring them, and I mean that.
Thank you, sir.
Right, this is going back to the Bob Arum thing, and I do mean that. Going back to the Bob Arum thing, Nick Cartagena 2. It's on. Bob Arum's indicated that starting in early June, he plans to run 3 shows a week on ESPN in an empty hotel in Vegas. I'm not sure it's 3 shows a week. Is this realistic, given it's now the middle of May? What kind of fights can we expect to see? Why rent an empty hotel in Vegas? Wouldn't it be cheaper to rent out a gym somewhere? I'll answer a little bit of that, which is they need a ballroom for what they're doing, for staging it. A gym's too small, frankly. And it's too congested, and you need people to do social distancing. There isn't a gym I can think of in Vegas that works in that way, and they'll need a jib and all sorts to do it. So, but the other things about 3 shows a week in Vegas in an empty hotel, and is that viable given it's the middle of May? I'll let you answer, Dan.
I think they're probably in the process of trying to work something out with the MGM Grand. They have plenty of convention area, ballroom area. I mean, I don't think they're going to put these matches in the Grand Garden Arena because there's not going to be any fans. They're just going to have a limited number of people that are there that are essential personnel to make sure that the show runs. Medical staff, the fighters, their teams, commission people, referees, etc. Those, some top-ranked staff, whatever. Media, I think, adjacent if they're there in a separate room so they're not clogging up the ringside area.
Would you go at the moment?
Well, I would not because no one's paying my way to get there.
No, but what? No, all right. But if Boxing Scene or I or anyone, we went to do a show every day, top rank, would you go at the moment?
As of right now, I probably wouldn't. But I would need to have a little more information, see what precautions are taken, what the professionals are saying, what the protocols would be. I mean, I would consider it, I suppose. But for the time being, probably not. I'll just be like the regular people watching it on TV. That's fine.
Would you be flying there or driving?
Well, I mean, for me to drive to Las Vegas from where I live, it's across the country. So even just to fly, it's a 5.5-hour flight. So driving is out of the question, obviously. I've taken that flight from Washington, D.C. to Las Vegas well over 100 times in my day. And it's a long flight. I mean, it's, to get from DC to Vegas, the itinerary going is like 5 hours and 40 minutes. Coming back is like 4 hours and 40 minutes, and it's even a little bit longer to go to Los Angeles.
But what I'm saying is, are you happy to get on an airplane?
I would not want to get on an airplane right now. No.
Yeah.
I mean, and being at the fight, I would be less concerned about them being on the plane, but I don't have to worry about that at the moment. I do think it's reasonable that they're going to do multiple shows in a week. 3 shows a week seems like a stretch to me. Keep in mind also that, and this is not any, they've said this multiple times, and not just Top Rank, but other promoters have said the same thing. When they do bring these fights back, they're not going to be the kind of shows where you have, 8 or 9 or 10, maybe even more fights on the show. They're going to be more limited to reduce the number of folks that are involved. So you're talking about cards that will be maybe 4 or 5 fights. So they'd have to do pretty much 2 shows to equal what would have been 1 previous show, because they do have a lot of fighters that they owe fights to contractually, and they're going to try to want to, get these guys in. It's not just a TV main event co-feature. They got young kids they want to keep in their 4-rounders and make sure they get their reps in. But yes, I do think ultimately we're going to see those kinds of shows in the hotel in Vegas, and it makes sense because it's an environment that they can hopefully keep clean, and people will have accommodations. They'll have the hotel will have some business because they obviously are going to be some money changing hands. From the network perspective, it's easy to set it up and just leave it there. The lighting and the ring and all the facilities that they need, a place to park the truck for transmission. So, it's a good way for them, I think, to work it out.
One of the things that people have been critical of me saying about Bob Arum on social media was, Bob told me this isn't a money-making process. Not to make money. It's literally to keep boxing alive. And people say, oh, what are you on about? No, it really isn't to make money, because these big fights or these cards they put on at the moment aren't going to make money. And this brings me to my next question, which is a really good one from, where is he? From Lopez III. Do you see superstar fighters like Joshua and Canelo fighting with no audience, or will they sit on the shelf until restrictions are lifted? Very good question.
That's been a conversation that a lot of people have been having, and I think it's possible. I'll give you an example. So I wrote a piece for Boxing Scene where I spoke to Eric Gomez and Golden Boy just to get their take on how they plan to come back when they can. And, they're working with the commissions, and they want to, follow the guidelines, make sure they have guidelines. Eric Gomez, who's the president of the company, made a good point to me. He said, whenever they come back, he's hopeful that some of the states that they work in regularly, like California, Nevada, Texas, and Arizona, that whatever the guidelines are, that they're uniform and that those commissions can kind of all get on the same page, which made sense to me. And so I said, it's one thing for you to bring back a Ryan Garcia, who is the target headliner for their first show, which they hope to have on July 4th. But I asked him, I said, what about Canelo? Would you consider a behind closed doors fight with Canelo? Keeping in mind, now Canelo's got his money from DAZN that pays the bulk of the freight for him, but the gates for those shows, even on a bad night, are like $8, $9, $10 million, upwards of more than $20 million in the case of the Triple G fights, $24 million for the rematch, $27 million for the first fight. So that's a huge amount of money for those events. His response was, we would talk about it. We have to see what the numbers say. We have to, number one, you got to see is Canelo willing. If he is willing, what does he need to have happen to make him be willing to do that? They need to talk to the people at DAZN, which is their broadcast partner that pays them a lot of money. It will come down to the money, obviously. But if they can come up with a scenario where if Canelo was willing to take less than what he's supposed to get and everybody works together, it is possible, because even Canelo and Joshua, for example, the highest paid guys in the sport, yes, they make a lot of money and therefore there's no urgency for them to fight because they've got so much money. I don't think they want to just sit on the shelf and not fight. I mean, they're fighters. That's their job. That's what they do. That's what they love. So I do think it's possible, but it's certainly not ideal. But if Anthony Joshua is going to fight Pulev in a reasonable time frame, there's at least a decent chance that it's going to have to happen without fans, unless they go someplace where they just don't pay attention to what's become the sort of the norm in the world of social distancing. If they go to the Middle East, and the Canelo Alvarez, I mean, he fights in Vegas. Maybe when they do a fight in Mexico where they have some fans, where they're planning to have fans allowed. I just don't know the answer to that. Each athlete's going to have to think long and hard. Do I want to continue my career and make less money than I do? Because keep in mind, whatever they pay Canelo, it's still a lot of money. It may not be $35 million like he's getting. Would he fight for 20? I mean, that's going to be a question that he's going to have to talk about with his family and his people.
I think there's only Canelo, Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua. I don't think there's any other major fights out there that would work on at the moment on a no audience basis. That would make enough money to pay the money that the other fighters get, like the few millions that White or Parker or that next tier, or Crawford or Spence. I think there's
Terence Crawford has said that he actually wanted.
No, we did it on one of our shows. Yeah,
more money than that. So the point I was going to make is that each boxer has their own idea of what they want to do. And I'm not saying any of them are right or wrong.
Yeah.
They're entitled to their viewpoint, and they're just going to have to make a decision on a fighter basis. As Arum has said, though, if a particular fighter that they work with doesn't want to fight without a crowd, okay, I respect that. Next man up. Who wants it?
Listen, we always said we'd make these less is more. I mean, it's difficult to shut me up, let alone you. So we got to shoot through these. We got to shoot through these last ones really quickly because I don't want to save them to next time. Because next week we'll have another chat. Right, I'll save that one question at the end. Right, very quick ones on these one. Who wins the unification match at 140 pounds between Josh Taylor and Ramirez? Do we feel any of existing 135 pounds top dogs step up to 140 and challenge the winner, so to avoid Loma? Raymond Strang.
I love the match. I was thrilled when I saw that Josh Taylor signed with Top Rank, not as a top rank guy, so to speak, but just because it meant they'd be able to make the match. It's the best fight you can make in that weight class to unify the titles. I know both boxers want to help each other. I think that is a fight where it's a true 50-50 fight.
Correct. It's like progress. It's like the Prograis fight all over again, isn't it, for Taylor?
They bring so much to the table in terms of they're both accomplished amateurs. They both have faced good opposition as professionals. They both are good punchers. They both are good boxers. They're both smart fighters. They're both in their prime. I mean, that's a classic kind of matchup. I mean, if you tell me you think Josh Taylor wins, I can't argue. If you tell me you think that Jose Ramirez wins, I can't argue. Honestly, I can't pick that fight right now. I need a little more information. I need to see maybe how they're training, talk to them if their fight actually gets made. Would a 35-pounder move up to challenge him? I don't think so, because I think if that fight happens, which Top Rank pre-pandemic was the plan, have each guy do the mandatory against Postol and Josh against the Thailand fighter, and then fight each other at the end of the year. I think the winner of that fight is probably going to move up to 147, certainly in Jose Ramirez's case, because he sees himself being undisputed at 140, and then maybe having a fight at welterweight, and then becoming a challenger in a very big fight against a Terrence Crawford. So I don't think that any of the 35-pound guys, a Devin Haney, a Lomachenko, those types of guys, I just think that they're not coming up to fight a winner of that fight, that the winner of that fight is going up to 47. Yeah, and
I'm staking my claim to the mast here that when that does happen, Ramirez and Taylor, even though I've been behind the scenes a lot with Taylor, no doubt, with Ben Davison and so on, I probably won't really be doing my genuine pick till the Thursday of fight week.
There you go.
One of those, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Very quick one on this. Who wins between Joshua and Fury? I'll go first on this. I think Fury outboxes Joshua, but I still think it's a potentially thrilling fight. Because if Joshua gets you hurt and he catches you, he finishes as well as anyone that's ever fought at heavyweight, in my view.
Well, one thing is Tyson Fury is an outstanding boxer, and he'll have the height and the reach advantage, and probably even a little bit of the quickness advantage. But he also gets hit a little bit, and when he does, we've seen him get knocked down. Certainly Deontay Wilder, who's a monstrous puncher, put him down 2 times. I don't put Anthony Joshua in that level of punching power, but make no mistake, Anthony Joshua was an excellent puncher. So it wouldn't shock me at all if that happened. So I could see Fury outboxing Joshua, but I could also see Anthony Joshua putting Fury flat on his rear end in that fight also. And as you said, Anthony Joshua is a hell of a finisher. Listen, there's a reason we want to see the fight. They're the 2 best heavyweights in the world. They both have claims to the world championship. Tyson Fury's got the lineal title and 1 belt. Joshua's got 3 belts. They're both British. They're both got charisma. Just make the fight. I'm not worried about who I'm picking right now. I mean, I got to worry about. I'm thinking about other fights before that, but I just hope it happens and may the best man win.
A92, Lewis Norman. I'm going to come to your question in a minute. OJ, Regis Boxing, UFC. I'm going to save the Duran Hagler questions for the next time we chat.
Let's do it. Let's get it on.
No, because this is too long, Dan. I'm sorry, it's too long. Who do you fancy to win, Haney or Lopez?
Great matchup. That's a tough one. I think at this moment in time, I would probably lean towards Lopez.
Really?
But just by a hair. I just think he's got a little bit more. He's a better puncher, in my opinion.
He is.
He's got a little bit more experience at the highest level. I mean, not to say that Haney's fought terrible opposition or anything like that. He's fought a couple of solid guys. I feel like though that the experience of the opponents that Lopez has had has just been a little bit better. Well, certainly a Richard Comey, even a Diego Magdaleno, they were at a better level in my mind than the opponents that Devin has faced, even though he did win a belt. And that's not a knock on Haney. I think he's an ultra talented young fighter. So I would just say right now, maybe Lopez by a hair, but that's again, it's kind of like the Ramirez and Ramirez against Josh Taylor. It's like, who knows? I know this. They're two tremendously interesting, explosive, exciting fighters with personalities and charisma. They're both undefeated. They both have titles. They're both in their early 20s. Teofimo, I think, just turned 22. Devin is just, I think, turned 21. I mean, for a young fight matchup, that's literally maybe the best you can get in the sport right now. Or any of Garcia, Ryan Garcia, Lopez, Haney, in a round robin between the three of those guys. I mean, I love them. Love those matchups.
It's one of those funny ones where Haney had a bit of a dip in performance last November in Los Angeles, didn't he? And Lopez hasn't had a dip at all. I get why you favor him.
Well, Lopez had a little bit of trouble with, I forget, Nakatani, which was the eliminator, the very tall Japanese fighter that he faced. He got some problems. And in terms of Haney, maybe not looking so great in the fight that you mentioned in Los Angeles, I'm going to cut him some slack on that because he ended up having a very serious shoulder injury. Correct. In that required him to have surgery. So I'll look at it like the glass is half full, and I will give Devin Haney a lot of credit for toughing out that fight with the injury and going 12 rounds and getting the decision. And just, what's the old saying, win today, look good tomorrow. Devin has looked so good in so many fights. That was a fight where maybe he didn't look that good, but you got to realize that injuries are a part of the game. And the fact that he was able to do it and get through it with the injury, he deserves credit for that.
We're going to talk about mixed memorabilia's question next time, because so it's in your mind, so we don't forget it. Looking back and after rewatching the Duran versus Hagler fight numerous times, I felt Duran was so savvy and skillful in that fight, even though way past his prime. The commentary was untrue as to the actual action. I don't know
which commentary is talking about. There's probably 3 or 4 different.
Yeah, exactly. I know. So, what are your thoughts on the fight then and now, many years later? Dan, you've only got a minute to talk about this. Okay. Let's do it now.
Of all the fights between the big four, that to me was probably the most boring of the matches. I was never they're great fighters, but I was never a great fan of the fight itself. It was not the most entertaining of their legendary bouts. But Hagler won the fight. I don't think anybody's disputing that. He won
completely agree.
A pedestrian 15-round decision. I mean, that is what it is.
No, I completely agree. I thought Hagler won the fight. And the onus was always on Duran anyway, on all those guys, because they were all coming up to meet Hagler, who was the biggest man out of them physically anyway. So, and Duran was a little bit weather-worn at that point, can I put it,
But Duran had some big wins after that. I mean, he might have been past his prime, but even beyond the Hagler fight, he did have some big wins. Certainly, several years later against Iran Barkley for the middleweight title. He had some other good wins, though, after Hagler.
Yeah. Hagler, one of my all-time favorites anyway, and as a person and as a boxer. And like,
I have a question for you. If Hagler's one of your all-time favorites, who do you think won? Because I mentioned this before about the controversy with Triple G and Canelo. Who do you think won Hagler and Ray Leonard in 1987?
Well, I think Ray Leonard won that. You've got to be fair to Ray Leonard, but
so do I.
Yeah,
See, you're an honest man, Gareth. I appreciate
you can't. I never agree with that principle. The boxing is the sweet science. It's about hit and not being hit. It's about the dance. And Ray Leonard danced brilliantly that night, and he bamboozled and he frustrated Hagler in the same way.
And don't forget, he landed some good punches also.
Oh, he was incredible. It's a great fight to go back and rewatch.
I love that fight.
At the time, they divided popular opinion. I mean, so it's no. Sugar Ray won that easily by a couple of rounds, no question. Finally, I just want to say a rest in peace to Jimmy Glenn, whose bar, Jimmy's Corner, Jimmy I think was 89 in the end. Yes. He'd been fighting COVID. There were reports coming from Lou DiBella and others in New York for us all, keeping us updated. He was a great guy. Never turned up at the bar till about 10 o'clock at night, even though you could sit there at 6 in the evening waiting for the interview. The last time I remember him in the UK was overseeing Monty Barrett when David Hay made one of his big heavyweight fights. And Monty Barrett leapt into the ring and fell over the ropes. Do you remember that?
I remember that. Yes,
and landed up flat on his face. But Jimmy always had time. He always had time to speak to you. I loved his wife, who was Polish, used to give me all kinds of abuse in that bar. I can't remember her name.
Was a wonderful guy. People talk about like a boxing guy. Like he is the epitome of the boxing guy. A lifer. You know, he managed fighters. He obviously was in corners with fighters. He trained some guys. He worked as a cut man. You know, always see him even as a fan at a lot of the New York City fights because he knew everybody and everybody in the fights. And the thing about it, two things. Number one, Jimmy's corner, not on the corner, was in the middle of the street, which is always found to be amusing. And the other thing that was always cool about, and I didn't go there all the time. I know some people were like devotees. They were always there on the Friday night before a fight or Saturday after the fight. But I did go there many times over the years. Number one, Jimmy was the one that was there, like you said, working late for sure, even, you know, into his later years. If you went there and you know what the prices are like to go get a beer or a drink.
It's amazing.
Always expensive. You go into Jimmy's corner, it was like a throwback to like, you know, 25 years ago because a beer was still like $3, you know.
Oh, so the tequila was about $4, and you know I drink tequila.
Exactly, it was cheap. You get a stout for like $3.50. You get a soda for like $2. I mean, always he kept the prices down, and I know that a lot of people there with their long tabs appreciated that.
Confession: my hotel was always opposite there in New York. I mean, well, not always, but 90% of my fights in New York, I was directly opposite in the hotel there, opposite a very fine hotel it is indeed, actually. And I wanted to stay there because I used to take anyone that was new to boxing writing or covering an event, meet me at Jimmy's corner at about, you know, for us, 5 o'clock in the evening, because it was already 10 o'clock at night in the UK, and we'd filed by then and things were done. And everyone that came there, and it's a very narrow bar, about
very small. I
mean, literally half the width of this room I'm sitting in, but it was a long bar, and it was stacked with memorabilia. Absolutely.
Well, you know me. You know, I'm a big memorabilia collector. That was what I would. Besides the people that were there and the boxing folks you would meet, you know, you'd always go there and look around. And as many times as I went there, I would always take a look at the kind of stuff that he had on the wall. And every time I would go, there was always something sort of, I didn't notice it the last time, because it was a wall. You know, my wall behind me is blank. You've got the one painting or two paintings up there. You know, but in Jimmy's corner, everywhere was covered, you know, with posters, with clippings, with photos, with autograph stuff. I mean, on the tables behind the bar. I mean, you know, it was like its own little boxing museum, and a lot of it was New York centric because it was the host city, and Jimmy was a part of that great thing. And one thing about Jimmy Glenn also, must have taken pictures with 50,000 people over the years, because everyone that came into the bar was a boxing person or a boxing fan. And so inevitably they would saunter up to Jimmy, and then he would he'd put his arm around them and they'd take a picture together. So you could probably find, and this is, you know, even before the selfie era, when they would give their camera over to somebody else and have them take the picture. I mean, Jimmy took pictures with everybody.
And obviously Jimmy's corner will continue. I mean, his sons and his nephews and all those guys run the bar. Don't forget to visit it. I don't have the exact, it's just off Times Square anyway.
Yeah, it's just off Times Square. I know that his son, Adam, I had read, it was in the New York Times actually, where they wrote a beautiful obituary about Jimmy, where I thought that his son, Adam, maybe it was a different story that I'm referencing. I apologize if it was a different publication, but I did see some quotes from Adam, Jimmy's one of his children, that he was going to make every attempt to keep the bar open. And by the way, Adam, to my knowledge, he graduated from law school. He doesn't need to be running a bar, but you know, it was so important to his father and to their family that he wants to keep doing it.
And finally, Dan, and we've gone on far too long tonight, and
we always do.
Jumbo Monroe asks, Prime Gareth A. Davies DT versus Prime Dan Rafael ESPN, who wins?
Well, in a fist fight, I would probably win, but you always have those crazy kung fu kicks in the press room. So if you use your legs, I might have a little bit of trouble.
You could not pay me enough money to hurt Dan Rafael, is what I'm saying. And the truth is, I'm not.
We can hug it out. Hug it out.
Exactly. I'm not having a fight with him anytime soon, and it ain't going to be on YouTube, and it ain't going to be anywhere. We're just going to keep on talking together, as always.
But if we do, we'll make money doing it.
There is one. If you, yeah, exactly. If you don't give me your dinner menu by the end of this lockdown when we do these, I might well drag you into a ring, because it's starting to get irritating that you don't know what you're eating.
I'm gonna have to just have my wife come and do one of these, and she could give you the menu. She's in charge of the dinner menu. I'm telling you, she's in charge.
Listen, it's always lovely to speak to you. I hope everyone's enjoyed this. I will speak to you probably early next week now.
Sounds good.
Yeah, have a good one, and congratulations on the show. It's going really well, Dan. The Impact.
Oh, can I give a little? I'll give a little plug if you don't mind.
Do indeed.
Our second episode is Friday night, 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 7:30 Pacific, and the guest is undefeated lightweight rising contender, who we discussed a little bit on the show, Ryan Garcia, who was a very good interview, had a lot of interesting things to say, talked about his desire to meet up with fighters like Gervonta Davis and Teofimo Lopez and Lomachenko and Devin Haney. I mean, he's a well-spoken young man and a good fighter, and I thought it was a very good and interesting interview.
Can't wait to see it, Dan. But I can't wait to see you next week as well. Stay well.
Same here, brother.
See ya. Thanks.